Hi everyone, Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5 here with my partner Mike Schoenfeld.
So Sam, one of the other questions that we get all the time now is rural versus urban projects. What changed in the Reform and Integrity Act? How does it all work? So do you want to kind of give the overview of what we're helping to explain to the industry in rural versus urban, and then kind of the implications based on the recent data that we've seen from USCIS?
Sure. So I think it's important to start with a little bit of context there, which is when the RIA got passed in 2022, one of the key things that enabled that new legislation to happen was a compromise. Historically, before 2022, most EB-5 investment capital went into large cities like New York, Washington, Miami. But one of the things that changed in the Reform and Integrity Act was the category of rural and also the continuation of the prior category of urban or high unemployment TEA. Basically, the government wants to steer EB-5 investment funding into more rural areas outside of New York, outside of Washington, D.C., and stimulate economic development in those more rural areas. And so the way they've done that is if you invest in a rural project, you get faster processing. So you get your I-526E, the application for your temporary green card. You get that approval on a priority basis. And we're seeing that take place in about 9 to 15 months, now that there's been a sufficient amount of time that's elapsed and we can see what that really means. And it also means that there's a 20% visa set aside for rural investors only and a 10% visa set aside for urban investors. So what does that really mean? The example I like to use to illustrate this is getting in line for a movie. So there's two movies playing at the theater. There's the rural movie and there's the urban movie. In the rural movie, there's twice as many tickets available. The theater is twice as big. And in the urban movie, there's half as many tickets because the theater is half as small. And what we've seen since 2022, since the RIA, there have been about 3,000 EB-5 investors who've invested post-RIA through the end of 2023. And of that 3,000, about 2,000 of those investors chose urban, and about 1,000 chose rural. So what that means is we've got twice as many people in line to see the urban movie, but that movie has half as many seats, and we've got a lot fewer people in line for the rural movie, but that theater is twice as big. And so there's no rule that stops people getting in line. And so people are getting in line every day, but those showings are only happening once a day, effectively, right? And so what that means is that the urban line is just getting longer and longer and longer because that theater doesn't have the capacity on any one day to meet demand, whereas the rural theater, it does. And so no one's getting delayed in rural, but investors who get in line today in urban, particularly those from China and India, the highest volume countries, we believe those investors today are going to be looking at a 5+ year backlog because there's just too many people getting in line. So Mike, this isn't the first time we've seen this phantom backlog situation happen. What happened last time?
Yeah, so I mean, we were in the industry back in 2014, 15, and 16 when for Chinese-born individuals, there went from no line at all to an extremely long line because it wasn't possible to see exactly how many individual investors had applied. So for Chinese investors investing in 2014, everything was current in the visa bulletin for them. And then in 2015, for the first time, a backlog was shown. Nobody knew how long that backlog would be, and investors kept investing. And very quickly after, it was clear that it was actually going to be a 5 to 10 year backlog. It went from no backlog to 5 to 10 years extremely quickly. So we've been through this before. Now, fortunately, this time we have data. The focus on transparency by us and other groups has gotten it so we have real information from USCIS on the amount of people that have filed in the urban and the rural categories. And although you can't know all of the different variables and how many people are on each individual application, how many green cards will be used, we can use pretty good historical assumptions to get to an analysis that shows what we estimate the backlog would be for Chinese and Indian-born individuals in the urban category. We have great urban TEA deals. We also have great rural deals. What we want to be sure is that investors choose what's best for them. So not every investor is the same. And post RIA, that's become exceedingly clear that there's different ways to structure deals with duration, urban versus rural, different profiles where some investor groups may prefer a short duration urban deal and others, the rural deal is by far the better choice. So it really just comes down to individual investors and making sure they're getting good advice from immigration attorneys, depending on what their goals are.
Exactly. EB-5 is no longer one size fits all, right? You've got to look at where's the investor born and where are they today. If they were born in India or China, unless they're comfortable waiting 5+ years for the temporary green card, they probably want to do rural, right? But if the investor is from, let's say, Chile, and they're not in the US, but they're not in a rush, maybe they want to choose an urban project with a shorter investment period. Or if they're in the US already, whether they're investing in an urban project or a rural project, we're seeing investors in the US be able to adjust status and obtain a work and travel permit in just 80 to 90 days. So if you're in the US already, on H-1B, on F-1, on E-2, you're able to do what's called concurrent filing, which means that your immigration attorney would work with you to submit your I-526C for the temporary green card, and at the same time also request an advanced parole travel document and an employment authorization document, or EAD, which combined will allow you to work and travel without any type of restriction within just a few months. So complete employment travel flexibility in just a few months if you're in the United States already. So that new variable, plus the faster processing for rural and the extra visas available for investors who select the rural category, there really are a number of different variables that investors need to consider before they decide what is the best project. Mike, how have we kind of structured our projects to kind of meet that framework?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that we're most proud of as a company is our ability to react to changes in the market, changes in the law, and changes in policy. So what we've done is we've now taken more of a menu of options approach. And investors, when they're thinking of priorities, some want the green card as fast as possible. Some want as high of a return as possible. Some want as safe of a project as possible in terms of repayment, and various combinations of all of those. So our aim is always to have several high quality urban and several high quality rural deals that hit on different aspects. No one project is ever perfect and optimizes for every single thing. So our focus is, let's present various options to solve for different problems and let investors make an educated choice on what's the best fit for them and their family.